Hey, good morning. We're just going to give a couple more seconds here for a few more people to join before we get started. All right, sweet. So good morning. Thank you for joining us today with our continuation on our Modern Work Security Series webinars. My name is Lori Martinez, and I am a Modern Work Solution Specialist here to help moderate and assist with answering your questions. I'll be placing a link in the chat for any feedback. So if you, want to let us know how we're doing, offer any suggestions, it would be greatly appreciated. We really value the feedback. It's really important to us so we know how to make these webinars better for you. And so the past few weeks, we've presented on some additional topics in the security series. So the past couple of webinars have been around mobile device management, mobile application management with Endpoint Manager, mostly around Windows, iOS, and Android. If you want to see or watch any of those, maybe you missed them, we'll also be placing a link to our YouTube in the chat as well, so that way you can access those at any time. This week, we'll be focusing on a bit of compliance with Microsoft Purview, DLP, and Endpoint Dlp. Today, you have Shay Awajobi and myself helping to moderate, and we have technical specialists Hunter Hogan and Ryan Ding presenting over the data loss prevention pieces. Please feel free to post any questions in the chat. And if you happen to have any additional questions or want more information outside of this webinar, please reach out to either your dedicated sales specialist here at Microsoft or your partner. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand that off to Hunter.
Thank you, Lori, and thanks everybody for joining us this morning. So as Lori said, my name is Hunter Hogan, and I am a digital technical specialist here at Microsoft. I have specific responsibilities over our modern work solutions, and within modern work are things like enterprise mobility and security, Windows 10 and 11, and Office 365, and data loss prevention, information protection, and compliance is one of those components as well. So today, what we're going to be going over is data loss prevention and information protection. And we're going to take you guys through a couple of slides and to highlight, the various features of DLP, and all that good stuff. And then we're actually going to jump into the tenant and give you guys a day in the life view of what it looks like to configure information protection and data loss prevention policies. I'm also joined by my colleague, Ryan Ding, who will be covering Endpoint Dlp, specifically after I go over information protection and DLP. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my camera because I'm going to be presenting, and we will get started. All right. So just a quick agenda. The first thing I want to highlight is Microsoft's approach to data protection. And then I'll give you guys a brief introduction to Microsoft information protection as well as data loss prevention. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with the most interesting part, which is a demo. So our solution is built around three specific pillars: know your data, protect your data, and prevent data loss. Knowing your data solves that dark data problem by giving you out-of-the-box insights into your sensitive data, where it lives, what kind of data, how it's being used and shared, all without any configuration needed. Next is protect your data, and it's all about classifying and labeling your sensitive data, and then applying protective measures like encryption and watermarking. And lastly, prevent data loss. This is all about preventing the leakage of the data outside your organization. And I'll do a walkthrough of how these capabilities all come together when we jump into the demo. Before we do that, I do think it's really, really important to highlight some of the key benefits of information protection and data loss prevention. I think we all know that information protection is becoming increasingly critical to maintaining business continuity in the remote work environment. Microsoft Information Protection provides several key benefits, such as a built-in experience across Microsoft 365 apps to allow information workers to remain productive, secure, and compliant in the current landscape. Now, first, the policies and labels are built in across Office apps and Microsoft Teams, and they actually work across platform, across Windows, Mac, as well as mobile platforms. Second, the experiences are powered by an intelligent, and automated classification service that has advanced capabilities such as exact data match and machine learning to classify personal and regulatory data. The policies, such as encryption and data loss prevention, go across a comprehensive set of workloads and file types and are unified within the Microsoft 365 Purview Compliance Center. So what do I really mean exactly when I say that it's comprehensive? Let's take a closer look. Now, with this solution, you have coverage across your on-premises data, Office apps across all platforms, whether it's Windows or Mac, web client or rich client, mobile or desktop, we've got it covered. SharePoint sites, Teams, groups, email, and like I said, even non-Microsoft clouds and apps, because the solution is integrated with Definitive for Cloud Apps. Now, that's really all I wanted to cover with the slides, because I think it's really important to show you guys in real time what it looks like to configure and administrate information protection and data loss prevention. So let's get into the good part, and we'll jump directly into the tenant. All right, what you guys are looking at right here is the Microsoft Purview Compliance Portal. And as you can see, there is a lot of functionality contained within just this one single portal at Microsoft. So for today, what we're going to be focusing on is data classification, data loss prevention, as well as information protection. Now, before we can actually create sensitivity labels through information protection, or even create our data loss prevention policies, we need to actually classify our sensitive data. The system needs to understand what type of information and what kind of information that my organization deems as sensitive and needed to be protected, whether that be through a DLP policy or a sensitivity label. So the first thing we want to do is come into our data classification module right here. Now, as you can see, we have a couple of different options up here at the top. We have things like trainable classifiers, which is actually a component that will scan all of your different content locations. And then from there, you'll be able to feed it certain information so that it can better detect what type of information you deem as sensitive. We also have exact data matches, which will allow you to match sensitive information to a string of exact data rather than on things like keywords. Now, what I want to focus on for this demonstration today is this component right here, these sensitive information types. Now, as you can see here, we have a lot of out-of-the-box sensitive information types. These are all included with the Microsoft Purview Compliance Center. And as you can see, there are 262 different sensitive information types that we have already created for you to utilize in the creation of your data loss prevention and information protection policies. It's as simple as clicking a button and you're good to go. However, we do understand that organizations a lot of times are going to vary in what type of information they deem as sensitive. A particular organization might have a particular project that they're working on that has associated terminology with it that they deem as sensitive and want to classify as sensitive to protect with either a DLP policy or a sensitivity label. Well, we give you the option to create your own custom sensitive information types as well. So let's walk through what that looks like too. So we'll hit Create Sensitive Info Type. We enter a friendly name as well as a description. And the next thing we need to do is define patterns for this sensitive information type. So you might be wondering, how exactly does Purview and the Compliance Center understand that a document contains sensitive information? Well, we do it through patterns that are utilizing what we call primary and supporting elements. So a primary element can be something as simple as a keyword, can also include a function or a regular expression. So for this example, we'll focus on utilizing a keyword. So you'll see you have two boxes here for case insensitive and case sensitive. For this example, I'll just be utilizing the case insensitive box. And what this is asking for is just simply keywords that might exist within your content locations that you deem as to be associated with a sensitive document or a sensitive information type. And these keywords can be anything. So for example, let's say that I am a product development company and I'm working on a top secret new brand of coffee. So I would want to enter certain keywords that are most likely going to be associated with that top secret project, that confidential project of creating a new coffee. So I could enter things just like coffee, dark roast, beans. The list goes on. You can add as many primary elements as you like, and they can either be case insensitive or case sensitive. So whenever I'm done doing that, I would hit done. And you might be thinking, well, does this mean that every single time somebody is creating a document and utilizing the word coffee or dark roast, that it's going to come up as a sensitive information type and be restricted with a DLP policy or a sensitivity label? Yes, that's exactly what it means. And the good news is that we give you the ability to further refine those primary elements through supporting elements. Because I don't know about you guys, but I probably talk about coffee and coffee beans kind of a lot with my coworkers. I think it's a necessity to get through the day. So what we want to do is we want to add some supporting elements to further refine those primary elements. And a supporting element is simply a word that can be found before or after that primary element. And you would add it just in the exact same way that you added your primary elements. So I used words like coffee and dark roast and beans. Well, I might want to require the system to look for a supporting element such as new, top secret, development. The list goes on, and you can add as many supporting elements as you would like. So whenever you add these supporting elements and you hit done, whenever we hit create, the Purview Compliance Center is going to be looking within your documentation for words that include things like coffee, beans, and dark roast, but also for those supporting elements that are either occurring before or after that primary element. So it's not going to return a simple coworker talking about, how they needed so much coffee to get through the day. It'll also be looking to see if they're talking about top secret coffee or development coffee or development beans or anything like that. So the more supporting elements that you can add, the fewer false positives you will return in the Compliance Center. So if I'm satisfied with all this, I can hit create. I'm not going to do that because sometimes it can take a few minutes for these to generate. But I did want to walk you guys how to actually create your own custom sensitive information type. So again, if you have a specific project that you're working on or a product you're working on, or really anything in between, you can come in here and actually create your own sensitive info types that the Purview Compliance Center will be scanning within your documentation to apply a DLP or a sensitivity label to. So now that we have talked about sensitive information and we have defined what my organization deems as sensitive, we can actually start applying information protection sensitivity labels and data loss prevention policies to the content stored in my M365 locations. The one other thing I wanted to highlight before we do that is what we call the Content Explorer. And so this is a really cool feature because it's going to show you exactly where your sensitive information rests. So if you have determined any of those out-of-the-box sensitive info types or any custom sensitive information types, you could explore where they're at in your M365 locations here within the Content Explorer. So if I'm interested in figuring out where certain credit card numbers are sitting, I can see the majority of them are in OneDrive. I can double click that. And it will actually take me to the exact file path of where that credit card is being stored. And it'll show me exactly what documentation contains credit card information. And it will do this for all of these different sensitive information types if they are present within your environment. So let's talk a little bit about information protection. So information protection is all about giving you the ability to apply sensitivity labels to documents and content. So what this means is that you can create labels that will allow you to encrypt files, add content marketing, or actually control user access to the file in question. It all depends on whatever protection actions that you want to implement based on the type of information that you're trying to secure. And as you can see, I have a couple created. So I have a confidential finance label that might be applied to any documentation I'm working on that contains credit card information or just sensitive financial data. But I also have a highly confidential label as well. And this could be anything. It could be a top secret project. It could be a brand new product that I'm working on. It could be anything related to just sensitive financial or regulatory data. It's entirely up to you how you would like to apply it. Now, I think it's important for us to walk through the creation of one of these labels. So again, we'll enter our friendly name. I'll just add some test stuff here. Once we've entered our name and description, we need to actually define the scope for this label. Where exactly do we want this label to apply to? Well, we have a couple of different options. We have files and emails, groups and sites, and schematized data assets. For this example, we'll focus primarily on files and emails. Now, the next thing after you define your scope is choosing the protection settings for files and emails. So you have two options. The first, you can encrypt files and emails, which will allow you to control who can access those file and emails when the label is applied to them. Or you can add a you can add a custom header, footer, and watermark to the files and emails if they have this label applied. And you don't actually have to choose one or the other. You can actually select both of these. So we'll do that for today. Now, once we have selected that, we need to actually implement our settings. So first thing we're going to do is implement our encryption settings. So we can select a couple of different things here. And what we can do is we can set an expiration date to this specific content. We can allow offline access. But I think the most important part of here is providing access to this data when this label is applied. Who do we want to extend this data to once we have applied our sensitivity label? So we want to assign our permissions. And for this example today, I'm just going to add one user, Adele Vance. So once we have assigned our permission to this, we will hit next. And then we are going to be able to work on our content marking. So once I hit this, it'll bring up the ability to add things like a custom watermark, a custom header, or even a custom footer. So what you can do is you can select this, and then you can customize the text that appears. So in other words, if the sensitivity label that I'm working on is applied, then it is going to show whatever document they're working on a custom watermark, header, or footer. And that custom watermark, header, or footer can be really anything. It's entirely up to you how you would like to customize it. Now, the next feature is something called auto labeling for files and emails. Now, auto labeling is an E5 feature. And if you're just using the standard E3 information protection license, the application of these labels is going to be a manual process. So what I mean by that is your end users, whenever they're working on a document and they've had a sensitivity label published to them, then they are going to have to manually label that documentation or content. Now, the way that we do this is whenever the end user goes to save their file, they're going to be required to actually apply a label that's been published to them. So in other words, it's not that they really have to remember to apply the label, because if they want to save their work, they're going to be required to apply a label in order to save it, but it is a manual process. Now, E5 takes that manual process and transfers it over to an automatic process. So instead of the end user having to manually apply that label, what they will do is nothing really, because the system is going to take care of it for them. In other words, the Purview Compliance Center will be looking to see if sensitive information is present within that document, and if that sensitive information has been appropriated to a sensitivity label, then it will automatically apply that sensitivity label. So that's the difference between E3 and E5. E3 is manual, E5 is an automatic process. Now, if we had selected groups and sites, this is where we would define our protection settings for groups and sites, and then same with our schematized data assets. So schematized data assets is something that's still in preview, and allows you to automatically label database columns in SQL, Azure Synapse, Azure Cosmos, and AWS RDS, as well as various other data sources. So we're going to hit next. It gives you the ability to review your settings, and then you can hit finish, and it'll create the label. So I'm not actually going to hit create label because it might take a minute or so for the label to be created, but I'll hit cancel and we'll come out of there. And so whenever you do create a label, they will appear here. And the next thing you have to do is you publish the label, which then transfers it into a label policy. And that label policy can be applied to documentation that is associated with the users that they are published to. So essentially, whenever, if you're on E3 and Megan Bowen goes to save a document and she's been published a sensitivity label, she'll have to apply whatever labels are published to her. Now, I think it's important to go over information protection before we talk about DLP, because you can actually utilize sensitivity labels, the ones that we created through this information protection module, in your DLP policies. So we can shift gears and talk a little bit more about data loss prevention. Now, whenever we click into data loss prevention, we are greeted with our overview page. And I think the important thing to highlight here is the top activities detected. So what we can see is we have, looks like 24 or different protected pieces of content being shared and where they're being stored at, which I'll dig into here in a little bit more detail when we talk about the Activity Explorer. First things first, let's look at some of our DLP policies. Now, as you can see, I've created a couple of different data loss prevention policies here, primarily centered around personally identifiable information, GDPR, and financial data. But let's take a look at what it looks like to create a brand new data loss prevention policy. So the first thing we have to do is choose the information that we want to protect. Well, this is exactly why we went over data classification before we even talked about information protection or DLP, because we need to tell the system that this is the type of information I deem as sensitive that I want to protect. And that's exactly what we're selecting right here. And as you can see, if we had any custom information, we would select those here. But these are all of those 226 different out-of-the-box sensitive information types that you saw on that screen when we looked at sensitive information in the data classification module. So we see people most commonly trying to protect things like personal identifiable information or GDPR or things like the US Federal Trade Commission consumer rules. So if I click on this, it'll give me an overview of what type of information will be protected within this package. So essentially, I'm creating a DLP policy to protect credit card numbers, US bank account numbers, and ABA routing numbers. And those have all been packaged up into a neat and easy to digest package here, because these all reflect things that are important to the US FTC. So keep that in mind as I go through this. I'm creating a DLP policy to protect these three pieces of sensitive information. So once I have determined that that is the type of information I'd like to protect, we go in here, and then we're just going to do some naming. And as you can see, it already inputs a name and description if you're using one of the out-of-the-box ones. The next thing we want to do is select the locations to apply this policy to. So as you can see, there are quite a few different locations that you can apply a DLP policy to. For today's demo, what I'll focus on primarily is Exchange email, SharePoint sites, and OneDrive accounts. So once I have those selected, you can further refine it by choosing a specific distribution group, a specific user. You can select specific OneDrive accounts or SharePoint sites, or you can leave it to include everything within your organization. It's entirely up to you. You might have certain DLP policies that are more restrictive for people working in finance than they are with sales. So entirely up to you how you would like to apply these policies. And as you can see, they can be extended to all of your different M365 locations, as well as your on-premises repositories. Now, once I have defined my locations, we actually need to define our policy settings. So you have two options. You can first review and customize default settings from a template, or you can customize advanced DLP rules. For the example today, let's take a look at some of those advanced DLP rules. Whenever we do that, you'll see we have two specific rules already created, and those are for a low volume of content detected and a high volume of content detected. So you might be wondering, why exactly do I need two rules if one piece of information is detected versus someone trying to share a lot of information? Well, the reasoning is that you might want to exhibit different protection actions based on if a person is sharing just one credit card number versus they're trying to share an entire list full of credit card information. You might want to be more restrictive for the persons trying to share that high volume versus low volume. So we give you the ability to create different types of protection settings for these low volume versus high volume scenarios. And if you want to, you can click this arrow and you can get just a quick overview of some of the protection actions exhibited by these different rules. However, if you want to get a more detailed view, you simply click this little pencil right here, and it will allow you to edit all of the different protection actions and rules for this specific DLP policy. Now, I want you guys to remember, I'm trying to protect credit card numbers, bank account numbers, and routing numbers. So what I want to happen, the whole goal of this DLP policy that I am creating is to protect these three pieces of information. So I want to restrict access and restrict the ability to share anything related to these pieces of sensitive information. So first thing we do, select our conditions. We have sensitive information type selected here. But if I hit add, you'll also see that you have the ability to associate a sensitivity label with this. So if I wanted to, I could simply add one of my sensitivity labels that we worked on earlier. And since this is confidential financial information, I might want to associate the sensitivity label for my confidential financial information. And so what this is saying is, I want to protect this information, these three pieces of info, as well as if it has this sensitivity label associated with it. You can also add some additional features here. So content is shared from Microsoft 365. This is where you can restrict sharing to people within your organization or outside. So I want to restrict this to just people within my organization. So what this is saying is, if a piece of content contains any of these sensitive information types, as well as this sensitivity label, and it's being shared within my organization, then I want to exhibit a particular action. You do also have the ability to add some additional conditions, such as a file extension or certain document properties, as well as an exception. So you can get pretty granular with this. You can say, hey, if someone's trying to share any of these three pieces of sensitive information, then I don't want them to do that unless there are certain document properties being exhibited, certain file extensions. It's entirely up to you. But the big important one is the protection action. So what you'll see here is you can restrict access or encrypt the content in your Microsoft 365 locations. And you can block everybody, or you can block only people outside of your organization. But restricting that access and encrypting it makes sure that anybody who shouldn't have access to this key sensitive information will not have access to it, whether that be inside or outside your organization. Now, the next thing you want to configure are your user notifications. I think it's really important to actually let your user know that they're trying to share sensitive information, and they should probably not do that, because this is actually all blocked in real time. Since remember, we're trying to protect credit card numbers, if one of my users in a Teams message messages a credit card number, it will be immediately blocked before it is sent to the person they're messaging. And what they will receive is a little tooltip if you have that notified or selected to them, hey, you're trying to share sensitive information related to this Dlp policy, and essentially don't do that. But it does tell them that their information is being blocked, it's being restricted because of the Dlp policy. So that's what we call policy tips, but you can also send email notifications as well. So you can send policy tips or email notifications any way that you would like to notify your user that they are trying to share something being restricted by a data loss prevention policy. The other thing you can do is add a user override. So what this means is sometimes there might be a reason to share sensitive information or to share information that is being protected by a Dlp policy. This could be an executive trying to do it, a director, or somebody that actually has a legitimate need to share this information. Well, what you can do is you can allow overrides. However, they're not just going to be able to click a button that says override this Dlp policy. They're going to need to require a business justification to override it. That business justification will be sent to your admin, and the admin will approve the overriding of the Dlp policy based on that business justification. Now, next thing, as we near the end, are incident reports. So what this means is it's how your admins want to be alerted that DLP policy matches are occurring. A couple of different ways that you can do it. You can send alerts to the admin center. You can send email alerts. All depends on how exactly your admins want to be notified. So once I have those settings done, remember that was just for low volume. You would need to configure those for high volume as well. But again, you might want to exhibit different protection actions and restrictions based on if they're trying to share one piece versus several pieces of sensitive information. Now, the last thing we want to do is test out the policy. It's always our recommendation to test out a policy before you apply it to everybody, but totally up to you. You can keep it off, turn it on right away, or test it out. And I'm not going to hit create because, again, it takes a couple of minutes or so for the DLP policy to be created. But once it's created, it will appear in my policies database right here. And two more things I want to highlight before I pass it off to Ryan to go over Endpoint Dlp are alerts and the Activity Explorer. So remember those alerts, those admin alerts I was talking about during the creation of the DLP policy? Well, if there are any DLP policy matches, those would appear here depending on my alert settings. And I can actually click on these and it will give me some detailed information on the actual alert itself. So why was I even alerted to this? Well, because Megan Bowen is trying to share information based on my DLP policy, which is my US Patriot Act enhanced policy. It tells me the location. Looks like she was trying to do it on SharePoint. And if I wanted to, I could come into something that we call the Activity Explorer to get a more detailed view as to where that DLP policy information is being shared or attempted to be shared. So coming in here, you can see I have several different DLP rules that are being matched. Looks like I have some associated with Microsoft Teams, with OneDrive, Exchange. Looks like someone's trying to talk about routing numbers and credit card numbers. And the cool thing is, if I click on this, it gives me more detailed information on what exactly this DLP rule and why it was being matched. Well, it looks like this one specifically, Megan was again trying to share credit card numbers. It shows me the file path exactly to where she was attempting to share it. So this really helps you understand. It's that principle that we have with our information protection of knowing your data, knowing where your data is being transferred, it's being shared. So that way you always have insight into where this information is going within your M365 locations. And with that, that is everything I had to go over with you guys. And I'm going to pass it off to Ryan, who's going to be talking to you guys about Endpoint Dlp, which you can see right here.
Thanks, Hunter. So everything Hunter has shown so far will help you detect and protect sensitive data within your M365 locations. So that includes SharePoint, OneDrive, email, and Teams. Endpoint Dlp helps us extend that protection even further to your physical devices, whether they are Windows or Mac devices. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So some actions that you will be able to restrict, whether they are Windows or Mac devices, will be copying to USB, copying to network shares, printing, copying to clipboard, uploading to unallowed browsers or domains, as well as access by unallowed applications. And the way that you enable these policies is the same way that Hunter has enabled his DLP policy. Is just one extra step that you will need to configure for Endpoint Dlp. So there are no additional softwares or agents. Endpoint Dlp is built natively into Windows 10 and the Edge browser. You just need to flip a switch effectively to enable the feature. It is fully cloud managed and everything can be configured remotely, just as with the rest of DLP. So if I go to my compliance center, the first thing that I will need to do, the one extra step, if you will, before you are able to use Endpoint Dlp, you will need to go to your Purview console, go to the settings blade, go to device onboarding and enable device monitoring for both Windows or Mac OS or whichever devices you are using. So once I have turned these on, I'm ready to go and I can start configuring my Endpoint Dlp settings the same way as I would my regular DLP settings. So I'm going to go over to data loss prevention. The first thing I'm going to want to configure is my global settings. So these are settings that will apply to all of your DLP policies as it relates to protecting content on Windows and Mac devices. And I'm just going to walk through all of these one by one. The first is advanced classification, scanning, and protection, which allows our data classification scanner, the same scanner that is going through all of your files and your documents within M365 to also scan files on your physical devices. And this allows you to use advanced classification features such as exact data match, named entities. File path exclusions for Windows and Mac. So file path exclusions just allow you to add folders and file paths that you don't want to be scanned for data, and generally this will be used for things such as temporary folders or cache folders that will just have a lot of junk, and you don't want to get false positives from those folders. Restricted apps and groups. This allows you to configure apps that will be blocked from accessing files with sensitive information. And you can do this by providing the executable names. The restricted apps group is a feature that is currently in preview and has recently been added. But what this allows you to do is basically create multiple groups of applications and provide different policies and protection settings to each. So you can have a more stringent set of policies for one app group than another. But just to show you what that looks like, to add an app group, you can just go ahead and give it a group name, give it a description, and then each application that you want to add, you will just give it a name and enter the executable name. And the executable name is actually what is used to identify which apps will be restricted. And then there's also a section for just non-grouped apps. But in this example, I've just added Notepad++ and Atom, and that's using the executable names. Auto quarantine settings. So this is also a pretty new feature. Auto quarantine allows you to have the option to, if an app or a file has triggered a DLP policy on your endpoint, you have the option to decide to move this file to a quarantine location. And there's also a setting for specifying where that location is, as well as a checkbox to replace the original file with a text file that maybe explains why that file was quarantined. You also have unallowed Bluetooth apps, which you will configure pretty much the same way as your restricted apps. Browser and domain restrictions. So this is a pretty big one. This one allows you to specify browsers that will be blocked from accessing files with sensitive information. So if you do have an approved browser such as Edge, and you don't want your users using other browsers such as Chrome, you have the option to restrict those here. And a lot of these are built in, so you can simply just check the box for the browsers that you want to restrict. You can also restrict service domains. So for example, you can decide, hey, I want all my users to be able to use any browsers, but I don't want them uploading files that have sensitive information to specific domains, such as Dropbox or their personal Gmail or their Google Drive. And so here you can add cloud service domains that you want to block. So you would just do this by entering service domains such as drive.google.com, dropbox.com, etc., and they will be blocked. So this gives you a lot of granularity in how you want to restrict browser and domain access. You can decide to allow all browsers and only restrict certain domains, or you can be a little more stringent on your controls with browsers and allow more on the domain side, but that flexibility is up to you. Additional settings for Endpoint Dlp. Hunter alluded to this a little bit with his DLP policy creation, but with Endpoint Dlp as well, you have the option to allow your users to override these restrictions and controls by providing a business justification. And this setting allows you to basically customize what the end user is going to see. And you can actually provide them built-in justifications or just decide that they need to type in their own. The last thing is just a switch for always auditing file activity for devices. And so if this is on, it's just auditing all file activity on devices, whether they're included in an active policy or not. So once you have configured all of these global settings, you're pretty much ready to create your policy. And it's going to look exactly the same as Hunter's example, but I'm just going to go into a policy that I've already created. This probably looks very familiar. We're going to go through the same steps of creating a policy protecting these sensitive info types. So financial data, credit card number, bank account number, routing number. You have the same protection actions that you have with M365. So you can decide I want to restrict access or encrypt content in M365 locations. But you will see after that that there is also a checkbox for audit or restrict activities on devices. So this is what you will want to check to enable Endpoint Dlp and protections on your Windows and Mac devices. And then down here you will see for each different activity type or restriction type that you have configured in your global settings, you will have an option to enable each of these individually. So for example, in the service domain and browser activities, I can decide I want to turn that on. And then for each one, you have 3 different options for how you want to enforce that. The default will be an audit only mode. So what this means is that the user will not actually be restricted from taking any actions, but any actions they take that trigger this policy will actually show up in your Activity Explorer, and you can trigger alerts from this as well. But we generally do recommend that you set these to block with override. So that means that any actions that you have restricted or any browsers or domains that you have restricted will be blocked from accessing sensitive files unless the user provides an override and a business justification. We'll find the same settings for file activities, and this gets pretty granular with each specific action, right? So you can decide that I want to restrict certain actions such as copying to clipboard, copying to USB, printing, using Bluetooth apps, and for each one you have the flexibility to decide what the action for that is. So I'm going to enable all these and make them block with override, except let's say the last 2, I only want a notification, I don't want to block it. And you can provide different groups of restrictions using the restricted groups. So if you decide that one group should have a more stringent policy than another, you can do that using this. And the same applies to your browser groups. That's pretty much it here. That's the only page that you will have to configure additionally on top of your other DLP configurations. Decide which of your global settings that you want to enforce and whether they are going to be in audit only or block mode or block with override. And then you have the same options at the end to test it out first or to turn it on right away. So let's see what that looks like from an end user perspective. Just a couple of screenshots here. So this screenshot is showing what it looks like in Teams. So this is not Endpoint Dlp, but this is what your regular DLP policy will be protecting. So in this example, Amelia tries to send credit card information and sensitive file information through Teams, and it is automatically detected by the scanner, and she's getting a message that her message has been blocked. In this next example, there is a Word document pulled up, and the user has tried to copy paste data from this Word document that has sensitive information. And this can be, as Hunter said, either automatically detected. So in his example, this would be credit card information, routing numbers, and then anything that you have configured on that DLP policy can be automatically detected, as well as through a sensitivity label that has been applied. But the user has tried to copy paste data to another file, and they get a pop-up from the operating system directly that this action is blocked, and you will need to either dismiss or you can click allow and provide a business justification. Same thing for this example, but the user is trying to copy to a USB removable media. You'll see that they have the same issue when they try to copy those files. They get a pop-up saying, hey, your organization's DLP policy has blocked this action. And this last example, which is highlighting the browser and domain restrictions, the user is using Edge, which in this example is an allowed browser, but they are trying to upload to their Dropbox. And because Dropbox.com was added as a restricted service domain, it has automatically detected that it is restricted, and they get a message that their action is restricted. So that's pretty much all I had to share in regards to Endpoint Dlp. The one thing that I did want to mention is that with Endpoint Dlp, in terms of auditing, you will get the same exact features you get with the regular DLP actions. So any actions taken that trigger Endpoint Dlp protections will also show up in Activity Explorer. So as Hunter was showing, when you try to move files around that are restricted, they will show up in Activity Explorer and you can trigger alerts from there. But you'll see the same thing with Endpoint Dlp, right? So if a user tries to do something such as copy paste a credit card number, that will also show up in Activity Explorer and trigger an alert. But I'll go ahead and pass it back to Hunter and Lori.
Oh, you're on mute, Lori.
Thank you, Hunter. Thank you both, Ryan and Hunter, for those really great presentations you guys did over DLP. At this time, I'd like to point out basically that we have one more upcoming webinar in our security series. The next one, we will be discussing our CASB product, Defender for Cloud Apps. So if you're interested in learning about, Cloud Access Security Broker, our product here at Microsoft, determining and finding out about any shadow IT that might be going on within your organization. It links really great with the information protection pieces that Hunter went over today as well as the Defender for Endpoint pieces. So it has a lot of great synchronizations within the Microsoft 365 environment. I'll be placing, or we might have already done it earlier at the start of this meeting, but I'll be placing again the registration link in the chat if you want to register for that one and you have not yet. And then since we do have a few minutes left, feel free to ask any additional questions in the chat. We can take them one by one. If there's anything that, we can't answer today, or maybe you need some information that is relative to your particular tenant, then we can, it would probably be best for you to reach out to your dedicated Microsoft sales representative or your partner. If you don't know who that is, of course, go ahead and send a message through the Q&A, and I can help to try to facilitate that. But Ryan and Hunter, thank you again so much for doing that. It seems like DLP for you guys is just second nature. All right, I don't see any questions here. Shay, anything on your end? You're on mute too, Shay.
Nothing on my end. Thank you so much, Ryan and Hunter. We've put in the chat, again, links to register for subsequent webinars. We would love to hear your feedback about the webinars so far. So please leverage the link in the chat as well to provide any sorts of feedback that you have so that we can use it to improve those webinars. And also, if you have, if you're looking to watch the previous recordings or recordings of this one, you can just follow the live link to get back to the recording, or you can leverage our YouTube channel to access the recordings to all the webinars that we've done so far. But thank you all so much for joining. Appreciate you. I'll pass it back to Larry.
Awesome. Thanks, Shay. I don't see any questions. Again, if something comes up later on, just feel free to reach out to your sales representatives again. But since we are coming up at the end of the hour, just like how Shay just mentioned, the recording will be made available to you for future reference. So you could either rejoin using the join link in the Teams invite, or you can access and visit our YouTube channel to view those recordings. It'll usually take at least give us like till next week to make sure that those are this latest one is updated and uploaded. But that's all we have for today. Thank you. Hope you all have a great day.
Yep, thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.